Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to NEWSROOM. I'm your host, Khalid. Today is Monday, the 25th of September 2023. The weather is changing, but the stories keep on increasing. Let's discuss what we have in line for you for today's show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the statement by the Chief Justice of Pakistan, who says that the determination to clear the backlog of pending cases in the Supreme Court is of importance. He said the Supreme Court has a huge backlog. You can argue cases in lower courts. Here we will issue notice, fix the case, and be done with the matter on first hearing. Adjournments will only be issued under special circumstances. The trend to seek adjournments on one excuse or another is over for now. The Supreme Court of Pakistan also disposed of 205 cases in the last week, said a statement that was issued by the Public Relations Office of the Supreme Court as well. More than 56,000 cases are pending in the top court as we speak. This is going to be our first segment. What is the way forward? How can the Supreme Court move forward in such a way so that all these cases are disposed of at the earliest? Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, today concerns the bitter row between India and Canada over the murder of the Sikh leader, Mr. Nijjar, and the fact remains that there's a lot of to and fro as far as the accusations are going. There is also a requirement by countries such as the US that India cooperate as far as the investigation into this is concerned. But what is all this going to lead to? Is this going to create a more of a regional tension between different important organizations like the NATO and the EU, or will it be work as usual after some time once the whole tension has died down? We will discuss this and more in our second story. Our third story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh who have begun a mass exodus from the area normally by car towards Armenia after the Azerbaijan defeated the breakaway region's fighters in a conflict dating from the Soviet era. We all know there was a major war a couple of years back, and now there was another escalation between the two, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, as a result of this, we are now seeing a mass exodus of Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. And finally, we are going to talk about a large sample that has been, the largest sample rather ever, that has been collected from an asteroid in space that has now finally landed on Earth. This is a lot of this is going to create a lot of curiosity, as to what can be discovered while examining this piece of asteroid that was brought back to Earth. Now, this latest sample has been collected as a first ever for NASA. It has landed in the Utah desert on Sunday after fiery final descent through Earth's atmosphere 7 years after that mission was launched. A lot of excitement is abuzz amongst the community, the scientist community in the US and across the globe as to what could be the findings of this sample of the asteroid. And we will, of course, be giving you more details when we get to know that as well. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns the Chief Justice of Pakistan, who has directed to clear the backlog of the pending cases. Justice Qazi Faiz Isa has expressed the determination to clear the backlog of the pending cases in the Supreme Court. To discuss that, we've been joined by our guest in the studio, Barrister Yasser. Thank you very much to have joined us, Barrister Saab. When it comes to the Supreme Court of Pakistan and the revelation that there are now more than 56,000 cases that are pending in the Apex Court, what has led to such a huge number of cases and such a huge backlog?
Well, I'm going to say something which kind of makes me a persona non grata with my own fraternity, as it were. But I think the blame for pendency, the blame for backlog lies squarely with the lawyers themselves. In Pakistan now, there's come a point where, or it's not now, it's been there for a while, where the lawyers have been making money by delaying cases.
Okay.
That's something that they've, so it's not about winning cases, but how far you can delay a matter. And that mindset or that attitude is what has led to this pendency.
There's a huge, there's a very big saying that goes, justice delayed is justice denied.
Well, then that's Pakistan's judicial system right now.
But is that going to change?
I believe so, and I think that's what the CJP is doing. I'm very hopeful, very optimistic. the thing about adjournments is, and adjournments of course can be granted on, in exceptional circumstances, but the fact of the matter is that you can't just, basically say I don't want to argue today because I'm not prepared. That's not an excuse, but that's the number one excuse that most lawyers have. So by saying that there wouldn't be any more adjournments, I think that, because you see the problem with running a trial or a court case for that matter is I mean, it shouldn't take that much time, and that's what the Chief Justice is saying. Chief Justice is saying you come in, there will be a notice and there will be a date of hearing, and then we'll dispose of the matter or decide it one way or the other, but we won't prolong it.
All right, there's another thing that the Chief Justice also said. He has said that the number of cases filed each week should be listed. There should be a list that comes out of all the cases that have been filed each week and disposed of by the court, and this will be issued regularly on a weekly basis. Do you feel this is going to put some kind of pressure on the Apex Court and on all the judges who are working for the Apex Court, so that the cases are disposed of at the earliest?
I believe so, and I think more than that, it will create a sense of urgency right from top to bottom. So you're going to have lawyers now looking at these matters very carefully. You see, I think one of the things that happened with that much televised, much talked about televised hearing last week, basically a lot of the lawyers now feel that they are accountable. So this Chief Justice is definitely making them accountable. I think that itself would, however, I must say that disposing of 200 cases, for example, in a week might not cut it, because you see that's going to lead you to about 10,000 cases a year. The pendency right now is 56,000 plus cases. Exactly. So that's going to take a long time. And this is a mindset that needs to change, not just at the Apex Court, but right down to the lowest courts.
Do you feel that such a backlog of cases also exists in other courts?
Absolutely. There are approximately 2 million cases, there's a pendency of 2 million cases all around Pakistan in various courts.
All right.
And I think that's all. The main contributor to the fact that there are delays is this idea, this mindset that lawyers have developed, that they're going to get paid for actually delaying matters.
All right.
So those delaying tactics need to be.
This delaying tactic that you talk of, is this something that has been developed of late, or is it something that has been there since decades?
Well, it's been there for decades, but it has gotten really
worse.
It's gotten worse over time. I would imagine well, because you see, okay, I'll just give you an example. A shelf life of a civil case in Pakistan is 25 years. A similar civil case in, say, UK, for example, which is the system that we follow essentially, is about 2 years.
Okay.
And that's from
and that's
start to finish.
the limit. I mean,
it
doesn't exceed beyond 2 years.
Doesn't go beyond 2 years. But in Pakistan, the shelf life of a case is 25 years. And I've personally known of cases that have gone on longer. This is just an average shelf life.
All right.
And that's only because the lawyers seek adjournments, because there's this one provision in the Civil Procedure Code which was given as a matter of, it was supposed to be. It is this idea that justice delayed is justice denied. This justice hurried is justice buried. So that's the other sort of angle to it. But because of that, essentially, what the Civil Procedure Code did was, under Order 16 Rule 1, it said a lawyer can seek an adjournment for a valid reason. Now there's no issue with that provision. It's about the valid reason. What is going to be a valid reason? Saying that my ear's hurting today and I can't appear, that's not a valid reason. I couldn't come, I couldn't travel from, say, Lahore to Islamabad for a court case. That's not a valid reason. Somebody else could have appeared on your behalf. So all of that, is sort of.
Do you feel that proper procedure needs to be implemented so that this doesn't happen in the future?
I believe so, and I think with this Chief Justice, what he's doing right now, this might have a knock-on effect right down to this. Might be a domino which might go down right to the bottom as well.
Okay, let's hope that happens. Barrister Yasser Latif Hamdani Sahab, on Wednesday, the Chief Justice of Pakistan constituted a committee of judges on case management that will also help determine the fate of complaints against judges pending before the Supreme Judicial Council. That will include representatives of premier bars and others as well. How important is this panel of judges, a committee such as this, in order to look on or decide on the fate of all the pending cases?
I believe given that there's general trend with this Chief Justice especially, he prefers democratization of the Supreme Court. So I think this would be a step in that direction. You don't want concentration of power in one person, you want it to be a collegial situation where you have a collegium of judges deciding these matters, not just what matters, and that kind of goes back to the main case that's being heard right now.
All right. When it comes to looking at cases and deciding on the cases, do you feel this process of accelerating the cases, is this going to be a gradual acceleration, or do you feel this is going to take a long time before, and if it is actually implemented in letter and principle?
Yes, I think it's going to, it is gradual in a way, but it's definitely going to take, it's not going to be a very slow process, it's not an inordinately slow process. It's definitely going to be faster. I think the Chief Justice is determined right now, and given his determination, one would imagine that good things would happen. I would imagine there's a good thing if the pendency goes down.
All right. The Chief Justice of Pakistan also said very recently, this is a message for everyone, and I quote him, that the trend of seeking adjournments will no longer fly. The number of cases pending before the apex court is quite high. Adjournments, this is also a huge, how should I say, this puts a stop or a pause to cases that are pending. Do you feel a process such as this? I understand that the Chief Justice of Pakistan wants to accelerate the process, but is it through just his pressure that this procedure will be accelerated, or do we need a more robust mechanism or methodology in order for this to be applied properly on the long term?
Yeah, so the adjournments are the nub of the matter. Like I said earlier, that's where unfortunately, and again I am saying this mindful of the fact that I am a lawyer myself, but lawyers have been misusing the adjournment process. So I think that needs to be fixed, and I think with the Chief Justice, again, once you see a trend developing in the apex court, it is going to have its knock-on effect or a domino effect on the lower courts as well. So I think this is definitely, but this, you see, the provision itself is sound, but it's the reason, right? The question of what reason are you going to adjourn a case for? If somebody dies, that's a valid reason. If there's a death in the family, if somebody is extremely sick, can't make it to court for whatever reason, that is a valid reason. However, it is not a valid reason that I couldn't, travel in the morning from Lahore to Islamabad, for example. A lot of Supreme Court lawyers come from, that's not a valid reason. That shouldn't be a valid reason. So I think this attitude coming from the Chief Justice himself, Chief Justice being the number one officer, legal officer in Pakistan, if he decides that this mindset needs to change and then takes that lead, I think Chief Justices of the high courts would also do the same, and then that would kind of trickle down to the lower courts as well.
I don't know really, Barrister Sahab, the whole process of how a case is decided, how long it takes, but is it that difficult a task? And in your point of view, when it comes to different kinds of cases, there are of course varieties of cases. You yourself deal with constitutional laws, and there are a huge plethora of cases under your constitutional law as well, and then there are other kinds of cases. There's family law, there are other forms of law as well. Should there be a bar on the amount of time that a case takes? Can that happen?
I believe so. I think, you see, this system works in other places, right? The Civil Procedure Code that we have is taken from Britain, and it works in Britain. The reason why it does is because you have block dates for a trial. What happens in a case? Let's talk about a trial. There's the prosecution or the plaintiff, depending on what nature, and then there's the case for the defense, and then there's the evidence stage that comes. You decide the issues and there's evidence. All of this shouldn't take, in my opinion, the longest case shouldn't take more than 2 weeks
All right.
to resolve. You know, provided you have block dates. That's my understanding of how it works in the UK as well as the US. You know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. They have the same law. The same adjournment process is available there as well. But what you do is you clear out your dates. That's the trial that you're doing 2 weeks, in those 2 weeks. And that's how you proceed.
But Barrister Sahab, is such a formula also applied in other countries apart from the United Kingdom, for example, in the United States and other European countries?
It does. It's there in the. See, it's not rocket science. The fact of the matter is, you present your case, you give your opening speech to the judge, then you present your evidence, you bring in your witnesses, then the defense presents its witnesses, then there's a closing speech saying, you know, this is what we've you know, adduced from the evidence, and then the judge decides. You know, if you think about it, it's a very short process. It shouldn't take years.
But you know, sometimes there is evidence that isn't present at the moment, that is required by the judge, and that could take some time.
But that's where the judge has to play a part and summon the evidence, summon the witnesses. That's where subpoenas should come in. There's no concept of having a subpoena in Pakistan, you know. So the question of subpoena is something that's there in the West, in the US and UK. Maybe that's a system we need to adopt, where judges take a personal interest in getting the witnesses to court. So,
but you know, politically we've seen in the past, without naming names, that we've had the chairman of a major political party who has kind of not applied his presence in court when he was asked to through different subpoenas, not once but many a times. Do you feel that procedure also needs to be made more strict, so that irrespective of who you are, what you belong, which institution you belong to, that you have to abide by the law and present yourself in a court when and if the court asks you to be present?
Exactly. And in criminal cases, of course, such a person would be subject to arrest warrants. That would be the first thing. In civil cases, there should be costs. So I think, because you know, if you look at sort of even our cases from early on, you know, from when Pakistan was newly independent, you had judges imposing costs, and the legal system actually seemed to work. It doesn't work anymore because these things have been taken away, and the real reason for that, again, you know, are the lawyers themselves. I'm sorry to say. It's not very popular for a lawyer leader to, you know, or somebody to be disbarred for something like this, right? Because that takes away from the vote bank of the various bar councils and associations, you know. So there's the regulator, there's regulatory capture of the regulator.
All right.
That's why lawyers get away with this. So I think this needs to be taken into account, and this needs to, but again, the leadership has to come from the very top, and I'm glad that the present Chief Justice is doing precisely that.
All right. So you remain optimistic, and you looking forward to a bright, resolution of all the different cases, of thousands, tens of thousands of cases that currently remains pending.
Indeed.
As far as the Apex Court is concerned.
Indeed.
Thank you so very much, Barrister Yasser Latif Hamdani Sahab, to have joined us, to have come all the way to the studios to give us a judicial perspective of what is going on and how important it is to take care of all the cases, the tens of thousands of cases that are pending as per the instructions of the Chief Justice of Pakistan. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much to have joined us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's come to our second story, ladies and gentlemen. That concerns, of course, the bitter row between India and Canada as far as the killing, the murder of Mr. Nijjar is concerned. A lot of to and fro, a lot of accusations, diplomats being told to leave their respective countries has been going on, visa restrictions and so on and so forth. What is all of this going to lead to? More in the following report.
Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a plumber who left the northern India state a quarterly century ago and became a Canadian citizen, was shot dead in June outside a temple in Vancouver suburb where he was a Khalistan leader among the many Sikhs living there. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said last week that Ottawa had credible allegations that Indian government agents may be linked to the killing. According to the international news agency Reuters, Sikhs make up 2% of India's 1.4 billion people, but they are a majority in Punjab. In the Niger's hometown, his murder has made the people worried about their future in India.
अगर इसको समझा जाए तो सिख इशू ही है, क्योंकि जो वहाँ कनाडा में गए हैं, बहुत बड़ी गिनती में वहाँ लोग गए हुए हैं, और कनाडा से जो रिश्ते हैं हमारे, वो सिखों के रिश्ते काफ़ी नज़दीक के हैं, इसलिए जो सबसे ज़्यादा अफेक्ट पड़ेगा वो हमारे सिख कम्युनिटी को ज़्यादा पड़ेगा.
Young Sikhs in India think that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party government has created an atmosphere of fear for them.
डर ਦਾ ਮਾਹੌਲ ਇੱਕ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਹਾਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾਤਰ ਕਿ ਯੂਥ ਦੇ ਹੁਣ ਯੂਥ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹਣਗੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਬੱਚਾ ਨਾਲ ਜਾਵੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟ ਹੋਵੇ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੂੰ ਭੇਜ ਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਡਰ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ.
Sikh community ponders India perceives Sikhs as their enemy.
Whosoever fights for Khalistan, fights for right to self-determination, rights for plebiscite in Punjab, India perceive those Sikhs as their enemies and they target them.
Sikhs living in India believe that Modi-led government has marginalized their community and forced them to live in a fear.
Ambassador Nasir Ali Khan sir is a former ambassador, foreign affairs expert who joins us in the studio. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us. How do you see this whole row between India and Canada as far as the murder of Mr. Niger is concerned? And of course, then there has been a second murder. We don't know who is behind it, but it kind of escalates the tension between both the countries. Where do you see all of this going?
Well, first of all, let's discuss the credibility of the actual accusations that the Canadians have made. In my opinion, they're very, very careful, very cautious.
And they took their time after the murder
Indeed.
of Mr.
So this murder took place in June, and then in August, the National Security Advisor Jodie Thomas travelled to India and met Ajit Doval and expressed her concern, and I'm sure presented him with solid evidence. It seems that there wasn't much of a response to this. They did not take it seriously. And then later on, between 9th and 10th of September, when Prime Minister Trudeau meets Mr. Modi, again he expresses concern and says that we have very, very solid evidence. This is not only human evidence but also signal evidence, which means that there is perhaps some kind of recording of conversations between people from the High Commission in Ottawa and the people who possibly could have perpetrated such a heinous crime. The other thing that I'd like to highlight is that it seems to me that the Indians on the one hand seem to lessen the actual impact or the importance of the Khalistan movement itself. They actually say that as far as India is concerned, it's non-existent. But at the same time, the statement they made in response to Mr. Trudeau's statement was that Canada was harboring terrorists and this and that. So my point is...
The point also is that Mr. Niger is a Canadian national.
Indeed.
The murder has happened on Canadian soil. And if you put everything aside, the murder of a national on the soil of the country by a third force, any country whatsoever, is against all international laws.
Absolutely. And you know, in the case of Jamal Khashoggi, the whole world was up in arms and there were sanctions put. Similarly, there were several Russian dissidents who were poisoned in Britain and Russia was sanctioned. So this is a very, very serious affair, and if it is proven, then India should be held accountable. This is what Secretary Blinken has said, that he has asserted that India ought to be accountable for its actions. Now, later on in the G20, I believe even Mr. Biden brought this subject up. So when they did not respond the way they should have, and they did not cooperate, or they did not agree to cooperate in an inquiry in Canada, then Prime Minister Trudeau was compelled to bring this out into the open. Because some of the people in India are arguing now, why wasn't it made public if all these visits and all these things were being expressed, these concerns? Well, they were trying their best to solve it quietly through diplomatic means. And when they didn't see a way forward, then he was compelled to make it public in Parliament, because I'm sure if it came out at a later stage, Parliament would have held him accountable for not bringing this up earlier.
And now also I'd like to understand, Melanie Joly, the Foreign Minister of Canada, also then highlighted that one of the Indian diplomats had been told to leave the country, and in a tit for tat, India also did the same. But India did not stop there. India said that now the Canadian nationals cannot obtain visas, not only from from the Indian embassy in Canada, but also from other places, third countries as well. What will all this lead to? More aggression, more tensions between the two countries?
Of course, it's escalating the problem, not to mention the sort of problems that it creates among the Indian diaspora. Because now it is autumn and the wedding season is on in India, and a lot of people wanted to visit India. And all their plans have been disrupted. Apart from this, the trade talks between Canada and India have been stalled. Now, India was hoping for a $6 billion increase in trade through these talks. So these are all serious matters, and they have led to a point where the situation has certainly scaled up a little bit.
Well, you spoke of trade. We know that one of the major trade deals was suspended even when Trudeau had visited India for the G20 summit. What do you see as the future of trade talks, trade relations between both the countries if the current situation continues in the same vein or becomes more aggressive?
Look, if it is proven that Indian government officials were involved, then first off, India should be sanctioned. So there's no question of trade anymore. That is my opinion, and that is how international law works. That is how international norms work. So as far as the potential that exists, of course, India is a very, very large economy, and Canada is keen to do business with them, and there will be pressure from large Canadian companies who can potentially do business in Canada. But at the end of the day, you have to be, you have to have you have to put a stop at some point. You see, you can't get away with something like that. And as far as I'm concerned, they have incontrovertible evidence before they would come out.
Or else they would not have said it in the Parliament or on other fora as well.
Absolutely.
We'll continue our conversation. We have to go to a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom, and we're discussing the row between India and Canada, and we have with us Ambassador Nasser Ali Khan, who's a foreign affairs expert in the studios. Ambassador Saab, a Canadian Sikh group has urged followers to protest outside Indian embassies. Do you feel that the Sikh community is going to get together, because nevertheless he was a Canadian and also a Sikh national? And looking at the past of the tense relationship between the Sikh community and the Indians, do you feel this is another chapter that could aggravate if things are not done correctly by the Indian government?
Absolutely. In fact, you see, with the elections coming up in May of next year, the Modi government, the Modi's party, the BJP, it actually tries to create divisions and fissures among the people, primarily to divert attention from the fact that they have not been able to deliver on their promises to the really poor. India is still growing economically, but there is a vast gap between the rich and the poor. So when the elections come, they need to find some kind of an enemy or create some kind of a division so that people with certain biases and prejudices, they will go and vote for the BJP. Now, you remember the instance in 1984 when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, and there was a pogrom. Thousands of Sikhs were killed in India. Now, if you create tensions like this, there is a possibility that within India, there could be clashes, people might attack Sikhs in areas where they are in a minority, and this could create an issue for them for the elections. Because I firmly, I can send you a link of a speech given by Ajit Doval at an institute where he was sort of complaining about what Pakistan's activities are within India, and we have sort of had enough, and now we want to change. His words were from a defensive to a defensive offensive posture.
Okay.
Now this is something which is on the record. The speech still exists. So the National Security Advisor, he is saying that we will spend money in Pakistan, crores and crores of rupees. In fact, millions and millions of dollars is what he said. And we will create problems for them in Balochistan. This speech is on the record. So in light of such an attitude, it is not inconceivable that, they go out and they sort of have a defensive, offensive posture towards the people who are damaging them vis-a-vis Khalistan. And the other point, if I may, the other point that is important, there is a book that has recently come out by an ex-RAW agent. His name is GBS Sidhu. He was based in Canada. And that book gives you the full details of how the Congress party, there was a small cell, they call it One Akbar Road cell, which had people like Arun Nehru and Sanjay Gandhi and all. They got together to create this problem, to be able to create divisions in Punjab, because the Akali Dal in those days was such a strong party that it was continuously winning elections. So to make inroads into the Punjab, this whole thing was created. Bindrawala was on their payroll. This is a RAW agent giving you full details of that story.
And I think that this needs to be highlighted as much as possible. We've also been joined by Dr. Sarwat Rauf. She's a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Sarwat, thank you very much to have joined us. How do you see this row? I'd like to understand, in your point of view, where is all of this going regionally and internationally?
Thank you so much for having me. Since you people are already discussing this issue in detail, so let me just highlight that how it would affect on, first of all, the region, because as it was, your one of the guests was talking about the involvement of RAW and some of the allegations which they are trying to put on Pakistan. So it is indeed on one angle to look at this issue is that Pakistan is directly nowadays, it is in Indian media, they are targeting Pakistan indeed, number one. And if we look at internationally, so one thing is being highlighted. That is, India is putting all the allegations on Pakistan that it is a terrorist country, and whatever is going on in India, whatever the problems inside India, this is because of Pakistan. And Pakistan is, there are a lot of allegations on Pakistan as the problems, Indian nationalism, rising nationalism. So they say that it is because of Pakistan's involvement. But now it has become very clear that this is not Pakistan. And as India was harping on about terrorism all the time, now you can see that this is not the case, and they are using the same strategy for Canada as well, that they are using their soil for terrorist activities. But I think now this is the time where West and other countries, they should realize that this is the real face of India. And as far as the point that terrorism everywhere, so this would not work anymore, because now there is a very clear picture that India has no other strategy to use. And what they are saying is that even Canadian soil is being used for this terrorism. Whereas the human rights activists who are rising in different parts of the world, even in Australia, one can see there in United Kingdom and in America. So one cannot deny this factor that they are, running out of their state and finding such platforms where they can show the real face of India. So in my point
out of
view,
ideas on how to put the blame game on Pakistan directly or indirectly, or how to take the onus of responsibility from India and put it on any other country. In this case, it is Canada. Thank you so very much, Dr. Sarwat, Rauf, to have joined us. Let's coming back to you, Ambassador Nasser Ali Khan. One thing is to put the burden of responsibility to any other country. They have used the Pakistani card. They continue to use the Pakistan card, as you have yourself highlighted during the course of our discussion. But the fact remains that, coming back to the intelligence of the murder of the Canadian national, we know that Canada is part of the Five Eyes. We know that there are other important countries that are part of it. We also know that there was intelligence sharing between these countries on this particular matter before things were made public. But there is another fact of the economic or geostrategic relationship that India enjoys with a lot of these countries that form part of Five Eyes. Will the countries, despite having ample proof, take adequate action against India?
Well, in the near future, they will definitely have to. They have no other choice. If there is evidence that cannot be denied, there is 100% proof, they will have no other choice. What may happen a few years from now is a different story, because strategically India and the US are now aligned, and most of the Five Eyes are under the influence of the United States, and it is quite possible that after a few years or so, this whole thing might be put in the back burner, and things may be forgotten simply because of economic and strategic interests. So because there are other instances, like in the case of Saudi Arabia, even Mr. Biden had given a very, very strong statement when President Trump was in power, that if he wins the election, he will take the people responsible to task. That did not happen, and relations now are a lot better. So it's all a matter of who is needed when.
Exactly.
After the Ukraine conflict, because of the oil shortages, of course, Saudi Arabia was a critical country in terms of supplying. So they had to make overtures, and Mr. Biden actually made a trip over there.
Okay. What I understand through all of it is that there are certain preferences, there are certain reasonings, whether it be geopolitical, geostrategic or geoeconomic, that lead to restructuring of relations between countries, and also putting aside a lot of grievances, so as to say. But at this moment, this topic is extremely hot, and a lot of organizations will not let this, put this in the back burner until and unless some kind of resolution comes to this issue. But are you, last question, are you optimistic or cautiously optimistic as to a proper result emanating from the inquiry and the investigation into this case?
Yes, I firmly believe that Mr. Trudeau would never have publicly announced this unless and until he had clear and incontrovertible proof. So yes, at the end of the day, they will have to bring this thing to an end, and as Secretary Blinken said, India will have to be held accountable. But out of the Five Eyes, Canada has always had a little bit of a strained relationship. It's not necessarily a serious matter, but as far as the two present leaders are concerned, for example, when Trudeau came into power and Modi went and visited Canada, Trudeau brought up certain issues of the farmers' strike, etc., which annoyed Mr. Modi. As a result, when he went on an official trip to India, he was received by a junior minister of agriculture. When he visited Gujarat, Modi did not even have the courtesy to be present. The highest level meeting that Trudeau had was with the Chief Minister of Gujarat.
So it shows basically, Ambassador Nasser Ali Khan, that India will go to any length to exact revenge, let's put it that way. Revenge is a strong word, but let's put it diplomatic reaction to whichever country tries to project the truth as to what India actually represents. Let's see, as you say, that some kind of result comes. Let's hope for a proper, investigation, and the result of this investigation to be made public, and those who need to be held accountable be held accountable. I think this is what is the need of the day and the need of the hour. Thank you very much, Ambassador Nasser Ali Khan Sahab, to have joined us. That was Ambassador Nasser Ali Khan Sahab giving us details, his perspective on this row between India and Canada. Let's come very quickly to our last two stories. The first concerns Armenia and of course the whole row between Azerbaijan and Armenia. There has been a war in the last few years, and there was another conflict recently, and now that Azerbaijan has won the conflict, Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh have begun a mass exodus by car towards Armenia, and of course this also shows that there is going to be a strategic change as far as Nagorno-Karabakh is concerned. Let's hope for peace in the region, where we all hope for that resolution of all the issues that currently exist in the world. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, a little cluster of hope from the universe that comes in the form of the largest sample ever collected from an asteroid in space that has now landed on Earth, the largest sample ever collected, and the first ever for NASA has landed in the Utah desert Sunday after fiery final descent through Earth's atmosphere 7 years after a major mission was launched for that respect. And now a lot of experiments will be held as to ascertain what is the nature of this sample, and maybe a lot of interesting and important results will come out for the future of mankind, the future of the scientific community. We look forward to that, and we'll be updating you as far as that is concerned. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new story segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.